Welcome back, night crawlers, to Nakora Nights. British Columbia looks peaceful on the surface. Towering mountains, quiet logging towns, winding roads through untouched wilderness. But if you talk to the people who've lived here long enough, they'll tell you the truth. Some towns were never meant to be found. Tonight, we're heading into the cold shadows of rural British Columbia, where isolation changes people, where the forests swallow sound, and where strange things walk the streets after dark. These are 10 true British Columbia small-town horror stories. Real encounters whispered by locals, travelers, and those who swore they'd never return. A town where porch lights flicker every night at the same time. Footsteps heard in snow, with no tracks behind them. And a woman seen standing on the highway shoulder, even though that road has been closed for years. These aren't urban legends. These are the stories people in BC refuse to talk about, unless the lights are off and the doors are locked. Before we step into the cold, tell me, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it over there? Because if you're watching late at night, don't look out your window. Small towns have long memories. If you're brave enough for the truth that never makes it into the tourist brochures, hit like, subscribe, and comment below, I made it out of the town. Now, zip up your jacket, watch the tree line behind you, and don't follow any voices you hear in the snow. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing True British Columbia Small-Town Horror Stories. Let's begin. I grew up in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Vancouver, a place where the houses leaned close together, separated only by fences that always needed paint, a place where people still waved even when they didn't know your name. My life had always been predictable, maybe even boring, and after years of drifting between odd jobs, I finally settled into working as a wildlife tour assistant for a boat company near the harbor, guiding tourists to see seals and whales. I loved the water, the wind, the calm space where I didn't have to talk too much or pretend to be anything other than what I was. That calm didn't last. Last November, my older sister visited from Halifax with her 6-year-old daughter. She had moved far away years ago, and when she came back, I always tried to soak up every second, because we both knew life moved too fast and family slipped away when you didn't hold on tight. Her husband couldn't come because of work, and only one day into their visit, my sister got a sudden call that forced her to fly back. Her daughter begged to stay with me for a few days. So I promised to take her back to Halifax after her scheduled event, something she had been excited about for months, a children's nature show happening in the city. The only flight I could book was late, and it meant I had to rush directly from the show to the airport. The venue had been loud and packed, and by the time we got outside, the night air felt colder than it should have. I remember holding her small hand and walking as fast as I could to the SkyTrain station. Just as we reached the platform, the man standing beside me mumbled something strange, something like the crowd looked stuffed together like tinned fish and how he hated tinned fish. I gave a weak laugh even though I felt that familiar unease rise in my stomach. I have never been good at talking to strangers, and I didn't like when they tried to start conversations with me, especially at night. The train arrived and we stepped inside, but even though I had booked 2 seats, an older couple sat in them. When I told them politely that those seats were ours, they scolded me and said, older people shouldn't stand. I froze up, embarrassed, anxious, unable to push the issue. Instead of arguing, I stepped back and decided to let it go. There were no empty seats left together, so my niece and I had to stand for nearly an hour as the train shook and swayed through the dark edges of the city. By the time many passengers got off at a stop near Burnaby, my legs ached and my niece leaned sleepily into my side. We finally found a place to sit near the back, and once I sat down, exhaustion overwhelmed me. I didn't mean to fall asleep, but the long day weighed too heavy on my eyes. My niece, being only 6, drifted off instantly. When I woke up again, the last passengers were stepping out at the Vancouver airport station. Panic shot through me as I jumped up and tried to gather my things. I shook my niece gently, urging her to wake, but she was too slow, still groggy, and before we could reach the door, it slid shut with a cold thud. The train jerked forward again. A message on the overhead screen flickered. Due to delays, this train would continue straight to Richmond with no stops in between. My stomach twisted. I pulled out my phone but had no signal. My chest tightened as fear set in, It was too late for return trains, and I had no clue what I would do if we ended up stranded in Richmond at this hour. I tried to calm myself and glanced around the train to see if anyone could help. By now, nearly the entire carriage was empty. Only 3 people remained: an older woman sleeping several rows ahead, a young man on the opposite side reading a thick book, and a third man seated behind me. Then I froze. The man behind me was the same one who had made the tinned fish comment earlier. He looked ordinary enough, average in build and height, nothing threatening in his clothing or posture, but something about him unsettled me deeply. I noticed him through the reflection in the window across from me. He wasn't reading, he wasn't listening to music. He was staring directly at me. His eyes didn't move even when I looked away. When I glanced again a moment later, he was still watching me with the same unblinking intensity. My throat tightened. Before I could think of moving to another carriage, he suddenly stood up and walked down the aisle. I assumed he went to the washroom, but when he returned, every muscle in my body stiffened. He sat in a different seat now, directly facing me. A few uneasy minutes passed before he leaned forward slightly and made a quiet comment about my niece being sleepy. I didn't want to talk to him, so I slipped my earphones in, even though my phone battery had already died. He stared at the dead screen, then smirked in a way that made my heart feel cold. He said softly that those must be powerful earphones if they could play music without a phone. My heart pounded. He said he was joking, but the wrongness in his voice made my skin crawl. I suddenly felt trapped. He asked if I was going somewhere or coming home, and without thinking, wanting to avoid confrontation, I explained what had happened, that I missed our stop, that we needed to get to the airport, that I would find a hotel. He leaned forward, still staring at me. He said there would be no hotels free tonight, and even if there were, they would cost too much. Then he said he had a place near the Richmond station, and that my niece and I could stay the night, and he would stay out of our way entirely. I forced a polite smile, trying not to anger him, and said we would be fine and that I could afford a hotel. He said in a soft voice that I wouldn't be any trouble at all. The softness in his tone scared me more than if he had yelled. The conversation dragged on for a while, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and every minute his insistence grew thicker, like heavy fog settling over me. I felt helpless. I knew I could not fight him. I couldn't risk waking my niece and alarming him. I had no signal, no help, no strength. I told him I needed to use the washroom, hoping I could escape to another carriage. Before I could stand, his hand shot under the table and grabbed my wrist with shocking force. The cold pressure of his grip stole my breath as he leaned closer. "You're not going anywhere." His whisper scraped through the air like a blade. He said I would stay with him and that he would keep me safe. His idea of safety twisted into something I didn't want to imagine. He wouldn't let go of my wrist. He told me to act normal. My vision blurred with fear. The only other passengers were far at the other end of the carriage, too far to notice anything. I didn't dare scream. I didn't dare move. I just sat there, frozen, praying the ride would end soon. Richmond felt a lifetime away. The train finally slowed, the rails making a groaning sound beneath us. The overhead lights flickered slightly, and the doors opened to the near-empty platform. My heart pounded as the man told me to wake my niece calmly and tell her we were staying with a nice man's house tonight. He held my hand tightly as we stood. I felt the world tilt sideways. I felt my legs shake. I felt the night air swallow us. Then suddenly everything exploded. A heavy force slammed into me and knocked me to the ground. I heard bodies thudding and someone shouting. I scrambled backward and grabbed my niece, dragging her a few feet away before collapsing into trembling sobs. Police officers were on top of the man, pinning him to the ground, cuffing him. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but shake uncontrollably. One officer knelt beside me and spoke softly, asking if I was hurt, asking if I could breathe, asking if the child was okay. I nodded through tears. They told me the young man reading the book had seen everything. He had noticed how stiff and frightened I looked, seen the man grab my wrist under the table. He had quietly texted the British Transport Police number that is posted in every SkyTrain carriage, reporting the situation. His message saved us. They arrested the man and safely escorted me and my niece all the way back to the Vancouver airport station, where staff helped us find a safe place to wait until the earliest flight. My sister cried when we arrived the next morning, hugging us so tightly I could barely breathe. But the story should have ended there, except it didn't. A week later, when I returned to my apartment in the West End, I noticed something strange. A bicycle delivery rider parked outside my building. I assumed he was waiting for a food order, but the next night he was there again, and the night after. And the night after that, even on days when I hadn't ordered anything. He stayed silent, glancing up at the windows, always looking at the third floor where my unit was, then pedaling away slowly whenever I stepped outside. Sometimes he held a blank USB. One morning I found a USB slipped under my door with no label. Another apartment had one too. People in the building whispered about it, wondering who was leaving them and why. A man in a suit started appearing too, following commuters from Waterfront Station to the same intersection every morning. He stopped whenever we stopped, but he never crossed the road, never spoke, never blinked long enough to look normal. Each day, a new layer of paranoia settled over my life. Even when I rode the SkyTrain again, I saw reflections that didn't make sense. People staring a heartbeat too long, shadows shifting in corners that should have been empty. Sometimes I wonder if the man who grabbed me that night was only the beginning, a warning of something bigger, something watching, something choosing. I still dream of the train, of his hand clamped around my wrist, of his voice saying he would keep me safe. And sometimes in those dreams he isn't alone. Sometimes the delivery rider is there too. Sometimes the man in the suit stands at the end of the aisle. Sometimes dozens of blank USBs cover the seats like silent messages waiting to be read. Sometimes I wake at 2:43 a.m., the hour everything feels too quiet, to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, even though my neighbors work day shifts. I don't open the door. I don't check. I don't breathe loudly. I don't ever want to see who stands there. I learned that night on the train that horror doesn't end. It follows. If you ever hear the chains, don't look back, just run. And hey, if you've been enjoying these stories, I've got a small favor to ask. If anything like this has ever happened to you, I want to hear it. Drop your experience in the comments. I really do read them. Got an idea you want me to tackle next? A nightmare you want to see turned into a story? Tell me below. And if you haven't already, hitting like and subscribe helps more than you know. Share this with a friend who loves a good scare. Love you all. Stay safe out there. I always believed nothing truly dark could happen in a quiet place like Victoria, a city wrapped in ocean air and tall pines. Yet every horrible memory I have now whispers that I was wrong from the start. Before I tell you what happened, there is a man behind this story, someone who never wanted trouble. His name was Marcus Hall, a calm person who grew up on Vancouver Island, the kind of guy who spent most days working odd jobs and spending lonely evenings reading on park benches. People in town knew him as quiet, polite, and never the type to cause fear. What no one expected was that a single strange encounter during his childhood would stay buried in him for years, shaping the eyes he saw strangers with and the way shadows made him flinch at night. He never talked about it, never named it, and maybe that is why the nightmares settled so easily inside him. And by the time he reached his 20s, when he moved into a tiny rented room on the edge of Victoria, whatever followed him slid quietly into his new life like a patient ghost. I was 16 during the autumn when this happened, and I still live close to the edge of the city near a quiet cluster of houses behind the high school. Every morning I walked there as the sky glowed pale pink over the harbor, and after classes ended, I usually wandered in the opposite direction toward the large public library near downtown. It felt safer than going straight home because it gave me time to finish my homework so I could relax later. Something about the soft lights and the sound of turning pages felt like a small world where nothing bad could breathe near me. I kept going there almost every day that year, sometimes staying 1 hour, sometimes 2, depending on how heavy school felt. The high school library never worked for me, too crowded, too loud, and usually filled with clubs meeting after school. The public one near the inner harbor felt warm and open, filled with books, rows of computers, and corners where someone like me could disappear. One afternoon, I walked across the street after the final bell and made my way down the short path toward the entrance. The sky looked cloudy, and the smell of seawater drifted on the wind from the harbor. I stepped inside, heading toward my usual spot near the back where a grouping of tables sat quietly away from the main crowd. That corner always stayed empty, and it had become my favorite place to work because no one bothered me there. I slipped into a chair, set down my backpack, opened my books, and started working. My mind felt calm, focused, steady. 20 minutes passed, maybe 25, before someone walked toward me. I sensed movement first, a shadow gliding at the edge of my vision. Then I looked up and saw a guy standing there. He wore a red shirt, had short dark hair, and carried a backpack on his shoulders. His face looked young, but not high school young, maybe 19 or 20, and I don't remember ever seeing him anywhere before. He asked me if I went to the high school nearby. The way he said it made it sound like he also went there, but I knew instantly by his appearance he was older than any student in that building. I told him I did, and he asked if he could work in this area too. There were several empty tables, and he did not need my permission, but I said sure because I didn't want to sound rude. He walked around me and sat directly behind me. I could not see him anymore, but I heard the chair move, the soft creak as he sat. Then silence, complete and strange silence. I kept trying to focus on my homework, but something felt off. Several minutes went by, and I realized I hadn't heard a single sound from him. No zipper opening, no notebook pages moving, no pencil scraping, no typing, nothing. Even his breathing felt too quiet. I shifted in my seat and stretched my arms, pretending to look somewhere else while glancing over at him. He had nothing out on the table. His backpack was still on his shoulders, and he sat there facing me, his eyes fixed on me like he had been staring the whole time. A chill ran through me, and I tried to ignore it. I pushed myself to keep working, telling myself I was imagining things, telling myself he was probably just thinking or taking a break. But every second that crawled by made me more aware of him sitting there in silence like a statue. Minutes later, I turned again, pretending to check the time on the wall clock. He was still looking at me, but the moment our eyes met, he quickly glanced away. Nothing moved near him, not his hands, not his bag, not a single object that should have been used for homework. My focus shattered. I could not read, could not write, could not think. I felt his stare burning into me from behind, and the worst part was the growing sense that he wasn't simply watching me. He was waiting for something. 10 more minutes of pretending to work passed before I finally decided to leave. I kept my movements calm, slow, normal, trying not to show that every part of me wanted to run. I packed my books into my bag, zipped it up, stood, and walked toward the front of the library. I did not look back at him, but as I stepped away, I caught a glimpse in my side vision. He stood up too. He started moving as soon as I did, as if he had been glued to my actions. I pushed through the front doors into the cool air. The moment I stepped outside, I heard the doors open again behind me. I walked faster to the sidewalk. My heart dropped only when I saw him walk to a small, dark car in the parking lot. He got inside, and for a second I felt relief. I turned toward home, walking past the high school on the opposite side of the street. The road felt quiet, empty. I listened to the sound of cars far away on the main road, the faint cries of gulls drifting across the wind, and the dull hum of the city settling into early evening. Then the same car drove past me. Slow, too slow, too slow. It rolled ahead, pulled toward a small parking lot across from the school, and stopped facing the street. That lot led to a park that stretched into Beacon Hill Park, a place some people used for overflow school parking when the main lot filled up. At this time of day, it was empty. The engine was still running. He stayed inside. I kept walking, hoping he would lose interest, but when I glanced again, the car backed out of the space and turned toward the road. My pulse hammered. He was following me. I quickly turned into the closest residential street. His car reached the intersection seconds later. I didn't know what to do, so I darted into a random driveway and crouched behind a tree. The leaves shook around me from the soft breeze, and my breath felt too loud. His car turned down the street, crawling slowly like he wanted to scan every yard. When he passed me, I stayed completely still. After he went almost out of sight, I dashed back toward the sidewalk and sprinted toward home. But when I reached my street, the car came in from the other end. He had circled around the connected roads. I ran again, cutting into a neighboring yard and hiding behind a bush. I could hear the soft hum of his engine somewhere in the distance, moving slowly like he was hunting. When it finally faded, I ran again, reached my street, and sprinted all the way to my house. I slammed the front door shut and locked it. When I peered out the window, the same car glided along the street, crawling, searching, but he never stopped. He never saw which house I entered. And after that night, I never saw him again. But that was only the beginning. The strangest part is that Victoria had already begun to show its darkness weeks before that day, as if something unseen was stirring beneath the quiet places. People whispered about odd things happening around the inner harbor, things that never made the news, only slipped around in soft rumors. A parked van sometimes stayed near the harbor for hours with its engine humming quietly, and someone inside filmed people walking by with a long camera lens. Tourists laughed nearby, unaware that they were being recorded from inside that dusty window. I passed that van once before school and saw the lens tilt in my direction. One evening, a university girl found a missing poster taped to a lamppost beside the bus stop outside her building. Her face was on it, but her name wasn't hers, and her details didn't match her life. She wasn't missing, but whoever printed it wanted people to think she was. And people mentioned a strange man being seen almost every night on the same bench near Beacon Hill Park, scribbling down license plates of every passing car. Nobody knew why. Some said he was collecting them. Some said he was waiting for a specific one. All of this grew like a quiet storm beneath the surface, blending into the dread already in my chest. After my encounter, every sound in the city felt sharper, every stranger's gaze felt heavier. I became paranoid whenever someone walked behind me, and even Marcus Hall, the narrator who remembered every shadow of his own past, would have recognized the fear growing inside me. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure if the man from the library was only part of something much bigger. Nights became worse. I slept lightly, listening to cars rolling slowly down the road, always fearing the same one would return. Sometimes I stood at the window and tried to convince myself everything was in my imagination, but then I would see the same van near the harbor again with the camera pointed at random people. Once, walking home from the store, I saw another missing poster with a stranger's face, but my street name printed beneath it. It rattled me enough that I didn't go outside for 2 days. Victoria had always been calm, soft with the ocean wind, but now it felt tight around me. Every alley near downtown felt like someone waited inside. Every bus stop seemed like someone watched from behind the shelters. But the worst fear returned one late afternoon when I walked home after meeting a friend near the museum. I felt the prickling sensation of being watched. And when I turned the corner past the park, I saw the same dark car parked far down the street. It sat perfectly still. Its windows were dark. Its engine was off this time. My hands went cold as I stared at it. No one else walked nearby. The air felt trapped. My mind raced through every memory from the library and the road and the slow engine that stalked behind me. I stepped backward, ready to turn and run, when the door of the car opened just a sliver, enough for someone inside to look at me. Enough for the past to crawl back into my bones. I didn't wait. I ran. My breast shook and my legs felt weak, but I didn't stop until I reached my house and slammed the door again. My heart thudded so hard the sound echoed in my ears. The car did not follow this time. It did not pass by later. It did not circle. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I think about Marcus Hall and the shadows in his past. I think about the man in the car and the van by the harbor and the girl with the wrong missing poster and the man writing down license plates. And I wonder if all those moments were pieces of something none of us understood. Something that moved through Victoria like a silent wind, choosing people, watching them, waiting. Sometimes I wake up at 2:17 a.m. with the strong feeling that someone is standing outside my house, looking at the walls, listening for movement inside. And the part that scares me most is not what I saw. It's what I didn't. I did not understand the danger until it was already inside my life, moving through the quiet corners of Surrey like it had always belonged there. I was fresh out of college when everything happened, carrying the kind of hope that feels too bright for the world. I had worked small internships back home, nothing special, but I had landed a position that I genuinely believed would set the direction of my life. The company handled forest mapping data for British Columbia, tracking wildlife movements and documenting environmental changes. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt real, important, like something worth losing sleep over. They placed me in Surrey, a place I had only seen in pictures, where the streets looked peaceful and the mountains stood still in the distance. The company helped new workers find housing because everyone moved around often. That was how I ended up sharing an apartment with another new hire. His name was Marcus, a tall, stiff-shouldered guy with a smile that never reached his eyes. At first, I tried not to judge him. He had moved from Manitoba, and he talked a lot about wanting to climb the company ladder. He wasn't rude in the beginning, just sharp in the way people become when they believe every person around them is in the way. Our apartment sat near a quiet road, lined with shrubs and a bus stop that flickered after sunset. The living room and kitchen sat in the middle, and our bedrooms were on opposite sides, each with its own bathroom. Clean place, new carpets, nothing that suggested horror. We didn't talk much. We didn't drive together. We didn't even eat in the same room. Once, I made the mistake of letting Marcus drive us to work when my bike chain snapped. It was a short ride, barely 2 minutes, and he still sent me a request for gas money. After that, I walked. For the first few weeks, everything looked normal. We both performed well at work, and though I did not like him, I assumed we could coexist. I put in extra hours, bringing files home, learning the software until my eyes ached. I felt proud. I felt steady. Nothing prepared me for how quickly that would fall apart. It began in a way small enough to ignore, small enough to doubt myself. One morning, I jolted awake far later than usual. My phone had died overnight. I always charged it, always followed the same routine, and yet that morning it sat cold and dark in my hand. Somehow, I still made it to work. I blame myself. But then it happened again 3 days later. I woke up to the alarm ringing at the exact time I should have been leaving the apartment. No margin for anything. I rushed out the door, barely remembering how I got to work. Later, sitting at my desk, I stared at my phone and tried to understand how the alarm could possibly behave like that. I wasn't a deep sleeper. I wasn't careless. Something was wrong. By that afternoon, a suspicion had crawled into my mind, quiet but impossible to ignore, that Marcus had touched my phone. When we both got home that evening, I told him what was happening. I didn't accuse him. I just explained. His response was a smirk that made my stomach go tight. He said it wasn't his problem, said maybe I wasn't cut out for the job, said waking up on time wasn't that hard. The way he looked at me after that made me feel like something invisible had snapped. I should have trusted that feeling. Days passed. I calmed down. I convinced myself I was imagining it. Until the morning I woke up and saw my work files scattered across my bedroom floor. I kept them organized, always. They were important for morning briefings. The folder hadn't simply fallen. Everything was out of order. I confronted Marcus when he came home. This time, I was direct. He rolled his eyes and said, I was messy, said I was imagining things. His voice carried through the apartment like he wanted the walls themselves to hear him. That night, I hid everything. My phone under my pillow, my laptop in a drawer behind stacked books, my work clothes wedged behind the bathroom sink. I even placed glass cups in spots where they would fall loudly if touched. I felt ridiculous, but fear made me creative. For about a week, nothing strange happened. Then the night came when everything changed. I woke in the dark with the soft, impossible sense that something had shifted in the room. When I reached for my lamp and turned it on, the light flashed across a figure rushing out of my doorway. Marcus. His footsteps hammered down the hall. I shouted his name and ran after him, but by the time I reached his door, he was already under his blanket, breathing slow as if he had been asleep the whole night. He told me I was losing my mind. He told me to leave him alone. I saw fear in his eyes though, not fear of me, but fear of being caught. I hardly slept after that. A few days went by quietly. I thought maybe he knew he'd pushed things too far. But then, in the middle of a long workday, I heard whispers across the office. People said Marcus was gone, fired. He had harassed a female coworker and was escorted out. I felt relief mixed with something colder. If he was fired in the middle of the day, he would have gone home hours before me. I stood in the parking lot for a long time before going home. When I stepped inside the apartment, the smell of something broken rushed out. Everything had been destroyed. Tables flipped, chairs shattered, the lamp smashed, the kitchen drawer pulled out and thrown against the floor. The TV was cracked like someone had taken a knife across its surface. But my bedroom, that was where the real violence lived. My clothes were ripped, my laptop cord was sliced. My papers were shredded into tiny pieces that covered the floor. The mirror had been broken, fractures cutting through the reflection like veins. It looked like Marcus had spent a long time in that room, making sure I understood how much he hated me. I reported everything. The apartment office told me they would pursue him legally, but none of that mattered because Marcus didn't come back. He vanished from Surrey completely. At first, I thought everything was over. But Surrey has a way of holding its shadows close, a way of making you feel watched even on quiet streets. And there were new things happening in the city. Things people whispered about, things that shouldn't have tied to me at all, but somehow did. Women at Guildford Mall said a stranger kept asking them for directions even though he had a GPS in his hand, following them store to store, repeating the same question. Doorbell footage around Fleetwood showed a tall figure scraping something metal against front doors at 3 in the morning, the sound dragging long across the wood. A rideshare driver on King George Boulevard avoided all main roads with passengers in the back seat, insisting shortcuts were safer at night while steering deeper into industrial yards. Police said they were separate incidents. The city said things like this happened all the time. But I couldn't ignore the way descriptions masked a shape I knew too well. And then the real horror returned. Quiet, deliberate, impossible. It began one night when I was lying in bed, trying to let sleep take me. The street outside was calm, the sky faintly glowing from distant city lights. I rolled onto my side and saw something under my door, a thin shadow shifting like someone was standing just inches away. My heart throbbed in my throat. I waited. The shadow didn't move. Not even a breath. I forced myself up, pushing my feet onto the cold floor. When I pulled the door open, the hallway stood empty, silent. Untouched, except there was something on the ground. A tiny piece of shredded paper from my files. The ones Marcus destroyed. I threw it away. I locked my bedroom door even though it never helped before. I slept with the lamp on. 2 nights later, I woke again with a slow, creeping sense that something was wrong. The lamp flickered. I reached for my phone and felt only the cord. The phone was gone. My stomach dropped. I sat up fast. And then a soft vibration sounded from inside my closet. My phone. Someone had turned it on. I whispered a shaky breath and reached for the door. When I opened it, the phone screen glowed from the floor. A single message was typed out on the Notes app, as if someone had been writing to me in the dark. Still sleeping late? I dropped the phone. My hands were cold. I checked every corner of the apartment. The windows were still locked, the front door untouched. But I kept thinking about Marcus, how he knew the building, how he knew my routines, how he had moved through my room without a sound. Days went by quietly again, but the peace felt wrong. Like the air was holding its breath. One evening, around 7:45 p.m., a knock came at my door. Slow, steady, not urgent, but expectant. I peered through the peephole and saw no one, not even a shadow. Another knock came, lower this time, like knuckles brushing the bottom of the door. I called out. Silence answered. I opened the door. Nothing waited there. But on the concrete, etched lightly with something sharp, were the words, "Wake up better." I called the police. They checked the area. They said kids probably did it. They said no one dangerous had been reported near my building, but I kept hearing the sound at night, the soft scrape of metal I had only heard about in other people's doorbell videos. 3 in the morning became a dangerous hour in Surrey. One night, at 3:04 a.m., I heard breathing behind my bedroom door. Not loud, just steady. Too close. I sat frozen. The door handle moved, not much. Just enough to let me know someone stood there, touching it with their fingertips. I dialed emergency services with shaking hands. The operator stayed on the line until officers arrived. They found no one. But in the hallway they saw something I couldn't explain. A trail of small glass pieces leading from my door toward the staircase, like someone had been carrying shards in their pocket and left them behind. The officer asked if I had broken anything recently. I hadn't, but Marcus had. The officers left. The hallway lights hummed. I sat awake until sunrise. The next week, a woman at work mentioned someone had been following her around Guildford Mall the night before, asking for directions over and over. When she described him, my blood ran cold. Tall, stiff shoulders, eyes that didn't blink enough. She said he kept touching something in his jacket pocket, metal or glass. I wanted to warn her, but I didn't fully understand what I was warning against. I didn't know if Marcus was stalking strangers now, or if something else had replaced him, something that learned me the way he once tried to break me, something that watched me from places I didn't know. 2 nights later, my bedroom light clicked off by itself. I sat up fast, staring into the darkness. Then the faintest whisper came from the corner of the room. Wake up. Not a voice. Not human, just a shape of breath. I turned the lamp back on so fast the bulb buzzed. The room was empty. But the closet door, which I always kept shut, now hung slightly open. I left the apartment that night. I checked into a cheap hotel near Whalley, barely locking the door before collapsing onto the bed. I planned to move out permanently the next day. But the horror wasn't done with me yet. Around 2:17 a.m., the hotel phone rang. I stared at it, not wanting to answer, but the ringing kept going until I picked it up. Static, then breathing. Then a familiar voice layered with something colder underneath. Sleep earlier? I dropped the phone. I unplugged it. I sat shaking until morning. I moved out that day. I never returned to the apartment. But here's the thing. Surrey is not a big place when someone wants to find you. It's filled with malls, small streets, quiet parks, industrial shortcuts, and shadows that cling to the corners. And sometimes, when I walk past a reflection in a window or hear footsteps behind me, I feel like he is still here. Not Marcus, but the thing that grew out of what he did. The thing that scraped doors at 3 in the morning. The thing that whispered from the dark. The thing that followed strangers through the mall and took shortcuts deeper into industrial yards. It waits. It follows. It learns. And sometimes, late at night, I wake up thinking I see someone standing in the corner of my room, tall and still, watching me with eyes that never blink enough. But when I turn on the lights, the corner is always empty. At least, that's what I tell myself. I kept telling myself the human mind can invent danger, yet that night in Burnaby proved it can sense truth before the eyes do. I wish I had listened to that first feeling instead of brushing it off like a late-night thought. I used to live in Burnaby back when I was finishing my final year at university, staying in an old rental house not far from the edge of the forest behind Kingsway. My name is Mason, and at that time I worked part-time at a small phone repair booth inside Metropolis Mall, a job that mostly meant wiping screens and pretending I understood every cracked battery problem that came my way. School, work, and games were my whole life then, because it was easier to fill the nights with noise than think too much about anything real. That was how I stayed close with my gaming friends, especially during those long winter months when the whole town felt like it never woke up. Burnaby could be a busy place during the day, but late at night the streets grew quiet in a way that pressed against your thoughts, making you notice every echo, every shadow, every shape that moved where nothing should be. My house was old and thin-walled, leaning a little, the kind of place that rattled whenever the wind touched it. I lived there with 3 guys who were also in their last year. One of them, named Ryan, gamed with us the most. He stayed up until the early hours almost every night, and we joked that he only passed his classes by accident. The others, Devin and Lewis, lived across campus in a smaller rental, and another friend named Cole lived farther away in an apartment near Edmond Station. We all talked on voice chat when we played, sometimes for entire weekends, and Minecraft was the game we somehow always returned to. It was simple, it was endless, and it let us talk about life or random nonsense while pretending to survive in a pixel world. That night began like every other. Winter break was close, and nobody cared about assignments anymore. We all met on the server after dinner, building a huge base that none of us would probably finish. It was calm, normal, easy. At least for the first hour. Then something strange happened, not loud or dramatic, just quiet enough to feel wrong. One of the guys, Cole, whispered something we didn't catch. His voice dipped like he didn't want someone near him to hear. We kept talking over him, laughing about some glitch, but he spoke again, low and tight, saying he heard something inside his apartment. We all paused for a second. Cole wasn't the joking type. He had this serious way of speaking that made even small things sound believable. But still, it felt like a stretch. Most of us lived near college areas where noises were nothing new. Footsteps in the hallway, neighbors moving things, late-night deliveries, all part of the usual. He said he heard footsteps inside, not outside. We brushed it off, convinced he was just tired or imagining things. He tried to talk more, but his voice shook enough that even through the mic it didn't sound like the Cole we knew. Then, out of nowhere, his name went gray on the screen. He went offline. No warning, no goodbye, no lag spike. Just gone. We all froze. Devin asked where he went. Louise said maybe he crashed. Ryan laughed nervously and said, maybe Cole got scared of a dust bunny. I stayed quiet because something in my stomach tightened in a way I didn't like. Cole never left without telling us. Ever. We tried calling him. No answer. We tried messaging. Nothing. That empty silence made the room feel colder than before. I lived the closest to him, about a 10-minute walk from his apartment complex, right between some old houses and a narrow strip of woods. People always said used to be part of an old trail system. The others started pushing me to check on him, joking at first, then sounding unsure when he still didn't reply. We were talking about what to do when something knocked on my front door. We all heard it through my headset. A sharp, sudden knock that made me jolt. Ryan asked what that sound was. I muted myself, pushed away from my desk, and walked down the hall. I peeked through the front window. It was Cole. He stood there panting like he had run the whole way, his hands shaking, his hood half off his head. He kept looking behind him, then back at the door, then behind him again. I opened it as fast as I could and let him inside. He shut the door and locked it twice, breathing hard. He said he ran because he was sure someone was in his apartment. He didn't hear us calling because he was sprinting full speed down the sidewalk. I asked him if he actually saw anyone. He said no, but he heard someone walking inside only a few feet away from where he was sitting. He lived with one roommate, but that guy worked late shifts at a grocery store and wouldn't be home until sunrise. Cole said he wasn't imagining the sound, he was sure. We all stayed on voice chat while I talked to him. After a few minutes, he said he didn't want to leave his apartment alone all night, and I knew if we waited too long, the fear would just grow. So we decided to go back to his place to check everything. I grabbed a metal flashlight and a thick wooden stick from the garage, and Cole held on to a small heavy wrench he kept in his backpack for bike fixes. Outside was quiet, too quiet. The street lights flickered like they always did in Burnaby winters, but the silence between houses felt heavier than usual. We walked together to his building, listening, looking around. The lights inside his windows were still off. Everything looked exactly like he had left it. We stood still for a long moment, trying to hear anything, but the whole place seemed empty. We unlocked the door slowly and stepped inside. The air was still. Nothing moved. We called out softly, asking if anyone was there. No answer. We searched room by room, turning on lights as we went. The tiny kitchen, the narrow living room, the bathroom, everything looked untouched. Cole's room was a mess, but it was always a mess. We checked the closets and under the table, even behind the curtain. Nothing. We went upstairs to the small loft where Cole gained and slept. That was where he said the sound had been closest. My heart thudded in my chest the entire time. Even with a stick in my hand, I didn't feel ready to swing it at someone if they jumped out. Everything upstairs was empty too. For a moment, the fear eased. Maybe he really had imagined it. Maybe some pipe shifted or the heat kicked in weirdly. I started to think about heading back and finishing the game with the others, pretending nothing had happened. Then we heard it. Heavy steps downstairs. The front door opened, then closed. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We just stared at each other and then rushed to the window. We caught a glimpse, just 1 second, of a tall figure walking away down the sidewalk, disappearing past the corner. Too dark to see who it was. Too fast to see a face. Someone had been inside, hidden, waiting. Quiet. We locked the door immediately, and the others on voice chat started freaking out when we told them. It hit us that the person must have been hiding somewhere we didn't check well enough. The coat closet, maybe. Or the small basement storage under the stairs that Cole used for old boxes. Wherever he had been, he was real. We should have felt lucky he left. But something deeper sat beneath our fear, something heavier. Because he didn't take anything. He didn't break anything. He didn't speak. He didn't even try to hurt us. He just listened. That thought stayed with me long after. Someone had been inside his home, quiet enough to avoid us, patient enough to wait, bold enough to walk out right under our feet. After that night, everything changed. We locked doors religiously. We checked windows twice. But it didn't stop the strange things that began happening around Burnaby, especially around Metro Town and the small streets near the old forest where I lived. The first thing I noticed was at work. One evening, when the mall was almost closing, I walked through the parking structure. The cold air made echoes sound sharper. I saw a woman looking at the mirror of her car, confused. When she left, I noticed a small sticker on the glass, a plain white square placed on the driver's side mirror. I thought maybe she put it there herself. Then I saw another car. Same sticker, then another. A perfect line of vehicles with identical white squares placed exactly in the same spot. Always on the driver's side mirror. Always smooth, neat, intentional. No text on them. No numbers. Just blank white squares like silent marks. It felt wrong. Burnaby had weird people sometimes, but this felt like someone tagging people, especially women. A quiet choosing. Another night, as I walked home from Ryan's place, I passed an apartment building near Patterson. Something caught my eye in the stairwell window. A man standing perfectly still behind the glass, not moving, not climbing, just standing there in the dark with his phone in his hand, the flashlight turned off. He wasn't using it, just holding it like he was waiting to turn it on at the perfect second. His head tilted slightly, like he was listening. Listening the way someone does when they are trying to memorize a sound. I hurried past, pretending I didn't see him. Later, lost mail started showing up in our lobbies. Packages that had been marked missing days before suddenly reappeared. Every tracking number scratched so hard the cardboard tore. The names smudged. As if whoever returned them didn't want the owners to know when the package had disappeared or how long it had been somewhere else. All of it made us uneasy, but none of it connected to that night with Cole. We kept playing games to distract ourselves, kept pretending everything was fine. Then the sound started happening again. Not in Cole's place, in mine. At first it was small things, a soft shuffle at the bottom of the stairs, a tap against the wall, the faint sound of someone stepping lightly in the hallway when no one else was home. My roommates were always out late or working, and even when they were home, they were loud enough that I could tell their steps apart. This was different, quiet, controlled. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up because I heard something touching my door. Not knocking, not scratching, just pressing gently, like a hand testing the wood. I held my breath and listened. For a moment, nothing. Then the pressure returned. A slow push, like someone leaning forward with their palm against my doorframe. I didn't get up. I didn't make a sound. I just stared at the door until the room grew cold. The next evening I came home, and something small caught my eye near the front entrance. A sticker. A plain white square sitting on the outside of the door, placed just high enough to be seen if you look closely. The exact same kind I saw at Metrotown. Someone had marked my house. The fear hit me in a way I hadn't felt since that night we saw the man leaving Cole's place. It felt connected somehow, like a thread tying all these strange things together. Someone listening, someone watching, someone choosing. I told the guys about it during our next game night. They didn't laugh this time. Ryan said he thought he saw someone hanging around our block earlier that week. A tall man standing near the curb, watching the houses. Devin said he kept hearing footsteps in the hallway outside his room at night. Luis said he got a package with the tracking scratched off even though he never reported anything missing. All these things were happening to all of us. That same night, something happened that pushed everything over the edge. We were deep into our game, working on the Minecraft base, when Cole suddenly turned silent. Not nervous silent, just completely frozen. I asked what happened. He didn't reply at first. Then he whispered that someone was at his window. Not knocking, just standing there, watching. He lived on the second floor. We thought he meant a shadow or a reflection. He insisted it wasn't. He said he could see someone's shoulder and part of their head. They weren't moving, just staring inside like they were waiting to be let in. We told him to leave the room immediately. He didn't. He whispered again that the person started tapping the glass, soft, patient taps, like the sound of a finger dragging lightly across the window. Then we heard a loud noise through his mic, a thump. Cole gasped. Then everything cut. He went offline, just like the first night. I ran out the door again, sprinting across the cold Burnaby streets. My breath burned in my lungs. The sidewalks were wet from earlier rain, shining under the streetlights. I kept thinking about the tall figure leaving his house that first night, the man in the stairwell, the stickers on the mirrors, the packages with scratch tracking numbers, the sound at my door. I reached Cole's building and buzzed the door repeatedly until a tired neighbor let me in. I ran up the stairs, heart pounding. When I reached his apartment, the door was unlocked, hanging slightly open. The air inside felt cold, like a window had been open for a long time. I stepped inside and called his name. No answer. His computer screen still glowed faintly. His chair lay on its side. His phone sat on the desk with the flashlight still on, pointing at the carpet. I walked through the apartment slowly, afraid of what I might see. His bedroom was empty. The window was half open, the curtain blowing gently. The fire escape ladder outside was wet from the rain, the metal glistening. There were footprints on the floor near the window. Not shoe prints, bare feet. Long strides, too long. Cole was gone, no sound, no struggle, no sign of where he went or who took him. Only one thing remained on the floor beside the desk, a small white sticker. The same kind used on the cars in Metrotown. Someone had placed it gently on the carpet near where he fell. Police never found anything. They said maybe he ran away or got lost. But none of us believed that, not after what we saw. Not after what we heard. Not after the way the man walked out of his house that first night without us even knowing he was hiding inches away. Weeks passed. The fear never left. The stickers kept appearing. Once on my own car mirror. Once on my bedroom door. I peeled them off with shaking hands every time. Sometimes I wake up late at night and I hear that same soft pressure against my door. That same slow, patient sound of someone leaning gently close, listening to my breath through the thin wood. Whoever he is, he remembers us. He remembers that night. And he remembers that only one of us saw him leave. I think he is waiting for the rest. I never understood how quiet a place could feel until I moved to Abbotsford. 2 lines were all it took for my life to change forever. I grew up in a noisy city where buses groaned through the streets and neighbors yelled through thin walls. But 3 years ago, I took a job as a night custodian at a small agricultural equipment company near the edge of Abbotsford, a place where the sky always felt too wide and the shadows along the farms looked like they carried old memories. I rented a tiny single-story house on a road that barely showed up on maps, a place where the crows always gathered on the telephone wires like they were waiting for something to happen. I lived alone. I barely talked to anyone except the older couple next door, who spent most evenings tending their garden, and sometimes I felt the loneliness in the walls of that house drifting around like cold air. My place came with an old landline phone connected to the cable bundle the company paid for. I hardly used it. I always relied on my cell, but I kept the home phone plugged in because I never saw a reason not to. Nothing about that quiet life felt dangerous, until one evening in the late autumn when everything changed in a way that still keeps me awake. I got home from work around the same time every day, the sky dim with that blue light before full darkness, the farm silent except for the far hum of a highway. I warmed leftover food, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. The house had that soft settling sound old buildings make when the temperature drops, little creaks that usually didn't bother me, but that night they felt sharper, like they were warning me. While I watched the screen flicker in the dim room, the landline suddenly began ringing. I remember staring at it, confused, because no one ever called me on that number. It rang in a long, steady rhythm that echoed through the house, and something about it made the air feel heavier. When I walked to the phone, the small screen glowed with the words "unknown caller." Normally I would ignore it, but something nudged at me, something small and uneasy, like a whisper under the floorboard, so I picked it up. At first I heard nothing, just a faint static hiss like someone breathing through cotton. I said hello twice, my voice low in the quiet house. Then a man spoke, his voice sounding like it was being squeezed through trembling hands. He said he thought he had the wrong number, the words shaky and unsure. I told him it was fine, but he just breathed softly like something was breaking inside him. The silence stretched too long, so I hung up and stepped back from the phone, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I went back to the couch, but my mind kept circling the sound of his voice, that strange mix of fear and confusion. I tried to focus on the TV, but every small creak in the house felt closer than it had before. About half an hour passed before the phone rang again. That same slow ringing crawled through me. I got up, checked the screen, and saw the same unknown caller text staring back at me. I don't know why I answered again. Curiosity maybe, or maybe something deeper, something that pushed me even though I should have walked away. As soon as I lifted the phone, before I said a single word, the man spoke again in that same low, trembling tone. He said the same phrase, that he thought he had the wrong number, like he was rehearsing it or like he couldn't stop himself from saying it. This time, he sounded more upset, like he wanted to cry but couldn't. I asked him who he was trying to reach, but he didn't answer. Instead, he began repeating the same line again, but he cut off halfway through, the words ending abruptly before he hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time. I didn't know if he was confused, unstable, or trying some strange prank, but the shakiness in his voice didn't feel like a joke. I felt a crawling sensation in my spine as I sat back down, the kind that makes you check the corners of your room even when you know nothing is there. The house's silence felt wrong, too deep, too heavy. Almost an hour later, the phone rang again. I stood up slowly, my stomach tight, and I answered because dread mixed with confusion does strange things to the mind. I asked why he kept calling me. He paused long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he repeated the same phrase in that same broken way. Something inside me snapped a little from the fear and frustration, and I told him if he called again, I would report him. Then I hung up. I realized I didn't know how to block numbers on a landline. I'd always just used my smartphone for that sort of thing, so all I could do was hope he would stop. I returned to the couch and tried to settle as night thickened around the small house. The farms outside were silent, the wind barely moving. The shadows near the windows felt too still, too watchful, like they were holding their breath. An hour passed and the phone rang again. I froze. Unknown caller again, but this time I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. I stepped back, letting the phone ring until the answering machine clicked on. The beep echoed through the house. My heart pounded as I stood in the doorway, staring at the phone across the room. The man spoke again on the message, his voice more frantic now. He said the same thing, that same line, repeating it over and over in a voice that sounded like it was falling apart. He said it 4 times, each one more desperate, before the message cut off in the 5th repetition. After that, there was a long silence, too long. I tried to distract myself, but every time I looked toward the dark windows, I felt like something might be out there waiting. The next call didn't come for over an hour. By then, I was exhausted. I prepared for bed and tried to push the uneasiness away. I went to my room, shut off the lamp, and let the darkness settle in around me. I fell asleep faster than expected, probably from stress, but something pulled me awake later, dragging me out of a dream so suddenly that I sat up on instinct. Before I could understand why I woke, I heard the ringing. The landline's muffled chime carried through the walls. Normally the sound was too faint to wake me, but not this time. Something about it felt louder, closer, almost like it was inside the room. The clock on my small nightstand showed the time as 2:17 a.m., its red digits glowing like a warning. The ringing finally stopped, followed by silence, followed by the answering machine's soft click. I waited for the man's voice, bracing myself, but he didn't leave a message. For a moment, I let myself breathe again, thinking maybe it was over. Then the phone started ringing again. The sound cut through the house like a knife. I stayed in bed and waited. When it stopped, it rang again 10 seconds later. He wasn't stopping. The pattern repeated like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. I felt panic crawling through me, and I knew that if I didn't answer, he would keep doing this until sunrise. I walked through the dark house to the phone, the cold floor making each step sharper. When I picked up the receiver, I hesitated before speaking. The silence on the other end stretched across the wires like something dark and patient. When I said hello, his voice came through again, softer, closer, like he was standing in a room with no walls. He repeated the same line, barely pushing the words out. I hung up instantly and pulled the phone's cord from the wall. Then I tugged the jack out until the whole thing came loose. The room fell silent. I stood there for a long time, feeling the cold air crawl up my arms. I eventually went back to bed, but it took a long while before sleep finally came. The next morning, the house felt normal again, sunlight pouring through the blinds like nothing had happened. I left the phone unplugged for over a week. When I eventually reconnected it, the calls never came back. Not one. But something about Abbotsford began changing after that night in ways I couldn't ignore. At my job, the security guard mentioned that a car had been parking outside a nearby school each afternoon. The windows were tinted so dark you couldn't see inside, and the driver always left the exact moment students started walking home. He said no one ever saw the driver's face. The way he told the story made the hair on my arms stand up. Every detail felt wrong. Then something strange happened near my house. A woman in my neighborhood told me she found a drone hovering outside her bedroom window at 3 in the morning, its red light blinking as it hovered like it was studying her. When she opened the curtains, it drifted away, smooth and silent, disappearing toward the tree line that stretched behind the houses. Another neighbor told me screws were being removed from several street-facing window frames in our area. People woke to find the screws loosened or missing entirely. The police didn't know if it was vandalism or something worse, but no one could explain why someone would target windows that faced the road. All those small, strange things started stacking up like building blocks, forming a shape I didn't want to recognize. Every time I walked outside, I felt eyes on me. Every time I tried to sleep, I imagined the landline ringing even though it stayed silent. One evening, as I took my trash out, I noticed something unsettling. Across the street, a car sat with its lights off, the engine barely humming. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside at all. It didn't move when I looked at it. It didn't move when I stepped back toward my door. I went inside and locked everything, my heart pounding. When I checked again from behind the curtains, the car was gone, leaving only the faint shimmer of exhaust in the cool air. The landline stayed silent for months, until one night when the wind rattled the loose siding on the neighbor's house, and the farms outside my window seemed to hum with some distant buzzing I couldn't place. I was half asleep on the couch when the phone rang, the sound slicing through the room. Unknown caller. I stared at the glowing screen. My breath felt caught in my chest. I knew I shouldn't answer, but my hand lifted on its own. When I put the phone to my ear, there was only silence, thick enough to smother. I almost hung up when the man finally spoke. His voice was softer now, almost hollow. He repeated those same words, but they sounded different this time, like they weren't a mistake or a question, like they were an invitation or a warning, or both. I hung up and unplugged the phone again, but the silence that followed felt just as wrong as the ringing. I realized something that night, something that made my stomach twist into knots. The man had never been confused. He had never dialed the wrong number. He had been waiting, and he had found me. I always thought small towns kept their secrets buried beneath the quiet, but I learned Richmond was different the night everything changed for me. I had moved there because I wanted a slower life. I wanted air that didn't taste like exhaust, and I wanted nights where the sky looked like a blanket instead of a screen of neon. I worked as a delivery driver for a local furniture place, driving long routes past fields, farms, and lonely houses. People didn't bother me there, and for a long time I felt safe, even welcomed, but something strange slipped into my life so slowly that I didn't notice until it was too late. My name is Nakora, and I grew up in a loud home full of cousins, noise, and arguments. After my parents passed, I drifted for years, doing odd jobs and sleeping in cheap rentals until I wound up in Richmond. It was supposed to be peaceful, and for a little while it was, but the peace cracked the night I walked home from the night market and felt something brush my pocket. I spun around, but the man who bumped into me simply kept moving, drifting through the crowd like he belonged in every shadow. People whispered that the same man touched pockets every week, never taking anything, only checking. I laughed at the rumor then, but I wouldn't laugh again. I first noticed the changes around 2:17 a.m. One night, the time written on my phone when I woke to the sound of something tapping on my window. My building was on the 3rd floor, and there were no trees nearby, nothing that could brush against the glass, but I saw the faint outline of a hand smear across it before it disappeared. I convinced myself it was a dream, but my stomach felt heavy, like someone had placed a stone inside me, and I slept with the lights on for weeks. During the day, things stayed normal, or as normal as they could be in a place where people smiled too politely and stared a little too long when you walked past. My job kept me busy, delivering tables and sofas to new immigrants, older couples, and students renting small basement suites. I liked the quiet drives and the cold wind along the river, but Richmond had a way of making you feel watched, even when you were alone in your truck. I think the real fear began the night I noticed the unmarked black sedan. I was walking home from the bus stop, tired and hungry after a long shift, when headlights flared behind me. The car drove slowly, crawling along the curb as if timing its movement with my steps. When I crossed the street, it crossed too, almost lazily, its engine barely audible. My heart began hammering, and I remember telling myself not to run, not to look scared, but my legs shook with each step. When I reached my street, the car paused at the corner, then drifted away like it had never been there at all. I told my coworker about it the next morning, but he only shrugged and said, "That kind of thing happens sometimes." That answer did not help at all. Things worsened when I began receiving messages from an unknown number. The first one arrived one evening as I folded laundry. It said, "You look better in darker colors. That light shirt washes you out." My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I stared at my shirt, the exact pale blue one I was wearing, and my fingers froze. I blocked the number, but new ones kept appearing from different numbers I didn't recognize. They always described something about me, something I was wearing, or something I had just done. They never gave a name, and they never asked a question. They only watched. I stopped going to the night market after that, but my fear didn't fade. It grew heavier each day, like wet sand stuck to my skin. I found myself jumping at every sound, flinching when someone brushed past me, scanning every parked car for unfamiliar faces. My neighbors began to notice, and some avoided me entirely, as if fear was something they could catch. One night, after the messages had gone silent for 2 days, I convinced myself it was over. I made a warm drink, sat on my couch, and tried to watch something funny to loosen the tension in my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little normal again. Then my phone buzzed. The message said, "The way your hand shakes is getting worse." I dropped the phone onto the carpet, and the warm drink spilled across my lap, but I barely felt it. Someone was watching me right then. Someone was close enough to see the tremor in my fingers. I rushed to my window, staring out into the alley behind my building. At first I saw nothing but the garbage bins and a few old bikes leaning against the fence. Then I saw a shadow standing near the far end, motionless like a statue. It was tall, too tall, with its head slightly tilted as if listening to something. My breath hitched. The figure didn't move when the wind shifted. It didn't react when a raccoon scurried past it. It only stared. I blinked, and it was gone. From then on, I sensed things in places where they shouldn't be. My apartment door sometimes rattled softly at night, even though no one was outside. My truck smelled like someone else had been sitting in the passenger seat. Small items in my home shifted slightly, keys no longer where I left them, shoes angled differently. I tried telling myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. The worst thing happened on a Thursday when I finished a delivery in the south part of town and was heading back to the bus stop. As I passed the entrance of a narrow alley, I heard footsteps behind me. I quickened my pace, but the steps quickened too. My chest tightened. When I turned the corner, the same black sedan rolled up and stopped beside me. My heart thrashed so hard I thought it might tear out of my chest. The window rolled down halfway, but I couldn't see the driver, only darkness inside. The passenger door clicked open slowly, like an invitation. I did the only thing my body could manage. I ran. I sprinted past small stores, past dim streetlights, past a man pushing a cart full of bottles. I didn't stop until I reached a brightly lit gas station. I stayed there for nearly an hour, pretending to browse shelves while my heart hammered against my ribs. That night, I slept with every light on and a chair wedged under my doorknob. But fear has a way of finding you no matter how hard you hide. I woke around 3:21 a.m. to the sound of faint knocking. It wasn't on my window this time. It came from inside my apartment. My skin prickled, and my stomach sank as I slowly got up. Something told me not to check, but I couldn't stop myself. I stepped into my hallway, and the knocking grew louder, slower, deliberate. When I reached the living room, the sound stopped. Silence swallowed everything. My ears rang with it. Then I saw the message written beneath my TV, smeared with something dark like ash or charcoal. It said, "I only check what is mine." I froze. My throat felt like it was closing, and my knees weakened. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and looked around, but nothing seemed out of place except my jacket, the one I had left by the door, now neatly folded on the couch. Someone had been inside. I left my apartment for 2 days and stayed in a cheap motel on the other side of town. I barely slept, flinching whenever footsteps echoed in the hallway. On the second night, my phone buzzed again with another unknown message. It said, "The motel's water pressure is terrible, isn't it?" That meant whoever was watching me knew where I was hiding. I didn't shower for 2 days after that. When I finally returned home, I tried to pretend nothing had happened. I tried to settle back into my routine, eat regularly, walk normally, breathe properly. But fear had built a nest inside me, and it never slept. One evening, while walking past the river after work, I saw something that made my skin crawl. The same man who brushed pockets at the night market was standing near the water, facing the dark ripples. His clothes were too thin for the cold, and his shoulders twitched slightly. I approached slowly, almost curious despite my terror, but before I got close, he turned his head toward me. His eyes didn't look real. They looked like reflections of something that wasn't there. He lifted his hand as if beckoning me, and every instinct screamed at me to run. So I did. The next week, I stopped sleeping entirely. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the man standing over me, checking my pockets, my drawers, my life. I felt like a possession, something a stranger could examine and claim. I quit my job because I couldn't focus on the road anymore. I couldn't focus on anything. Desperate for help, I talked to an older woman who lived in the same building. She listened quietly, nodding slowly, then said something that made my skin prickle. She told me Richmond had always had a watcher, someone who followed newcomers until they either left or broke. She said some people saw him, some heard him, some felt him, but he always came for those who were alone. I asked her how to stop him. She only smiled sadly and said, "You don't stop him, you just hope he loses interest." That night, I couldn't sit still. My heart pounded for no reason, my hands trembled, and I kept hearing faint footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Around 2:43 a.m., I glanced out my window and saw a woman walking into the woods beyond the street. She wore thin pajamas and no shoes. Her hair hung down straight, and her steps were stiff. She walked the same path every night after that, always at the same time, always disappearing into the dark trees. I tried calling out to her once, but she didn't react. She didn't even look in my direction. She just kept walking like she wasn't fully there. The more I noticed strange things, the more I felt like they noticed me back. One night, while making tea, I heard a whisper behind me, so soft I thought it was my own breath echoing. It said, "You dropped this." I turned quickly, and my spoon clattered onto the floor. No one was there. But when I bent down to pick it up, I saw something beneath the counter, a phone. Not mine. When I unlocked it, the screen showed dozens of photos. All of me sleeping, me eating, me tying my shoes, me staring at my window, me running from the black sedan. My hands numbed and I nearly dropped the device. The final photo chilled me the most. It was taken inside my apartment, only feet behind me, and in the background, my reflection in the window looked wrong, like something was standing behind me that I couldn't see. I smashed the phone with a hammer I kept for fixing furniture, breaking it until only the battery and shards remained. But that didn't stop anything. That very night, someone knocked gently on my door, whispering softly through the wood, "Do you remember me yet?" I didn't answer, and the knocking eventually stopped, but my heartbeat never did. The last event, the one that pushed me to the edge, happened on a stormy Saturday when winds howled through the streets. I had barely slept for 3 days, and my mind buzzed with exhaustion. At some point, the power went out, and the whole building fell into darkness. I tried lighting a candle, but my hand shook too badly. I sat on the couch, listening to the creaks around me. Then I heard footsteps again, except this time they were inside my apartment. I froze, every muscle locking. The air turned cold, heavy, and I could smell something metallic. Then a voice from the darkness said, "I only check what is mine because you forgot who you belong to." My breathing turned shallow, and tears blurred my vision. The silhouette moved closer, tall and thin, its presence filling the room. My chest felt crushed, and every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. When lightning flashed outside for a split second, I saw the figure clearly, and my mind broke a little. Its face looked like melted wax, its eyes deep holes, its hands long and reaching. Then darkness swallowed everything again. I don't remember what happened next. I woke on the floor hours later, the storm gone, my apartment silent. The only sign of anything real was a set of footprints leading from my bedroom to my couch, prints that didn't belong to me. Now, I don't sleep, I barely eat. I live with the lights always on. Whenever I close my eyes, I feel someone checking my pockets, brushing against my shoulder, standing behind me. I left Richmond, but it didn't matter. The strange texts follow me. The knocking follows me. The presence follows me. Last night, at 2:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of soft tapping on my window once more, even though I now live on the 6th floor of a new building. The tapping grew louder, slower, then stopped completely. My phone buzzed. One new message. It said, "I found you again. I think I always knew I could run from a town, but I could never run from a claim." I kept seeing the same scene in my dreams, and I never understood why. I always woke with the feeling that something in Kelowna was waiting for me, watching me, learning the sound of my steps. I grew up far from British Columbia, in a quiet prairie town where nothing strange ever happened, where people waved from porches and locked their doors only out of habit. I moved to Kelowna for college because I wanted mountains, lakes, and a life that felt bigger than the roads I knew. I studied environmental geography, spent most days hiking trails near Knox Mountain, and worked evenings at a small lakeside cafe. People knew me as Rowan, the quiet kid who liked long walks and rarely drank. I lived with two roommates, Mara and Lacey, in a small apartment overlooking a stretch of old neighborhoods near Glenmore, where the houses looked worn but alive, roofs sagging from snow and time. Everyone in our friend group wanted to celebrate. I was never a heavy drinker, never more than a couple of beers, but I liked being around people and laughing and pretending that finals did not exist. We had a big group, most of us from the same geography program, and after the last exam we all met at a friend's basement suite near the lake. The sun was still warm, the sidewalks crowded with students who carried boxes, hugged each other, and shouted about summer plans. The hangout stretched into the night. People played music, danced, talked too loudly, then drifted into the street toward the cluster of bars on Bernard Avenue. It turned into that classic college night where everything is loud, sweaty, confusing, and everyone keeps vanishing into different places. Some stayed behind at the first bar, others pushed into the next, and a few wandered off for food. It was one of those nights where you kept turning around and realizing half the people you came with were gone. I stayed mostly with the group near me, leaning on sticky bar counters and listening to friends complain about exams. I knew Mara was in that same bar, already tipsy and laughing about something, but Lacey had gone with another bunch to a different place. Past midnight, people started leaving one by one. I felt that restless need to move and heard from someone that a few friends had gone to a bar I actually liked. It was only a short walk, so I decided to go. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. The screen showed that Lacey was calling. I had not seen her in hours. When I answered, all I heard was her saying she needed help. The words came out tight, like she was trying not to cry. I asked where she was, but the call ended. My stomach knotted. She drank more than I ever did, but she was not the kind of person who called for help unless something was truly wrong. I tried calling back, but she did not answer. A moment later, a text arrived. It was only her location, no words with it, just the pin. The address was unfamiliar, not a bar, not a restaurant, nothing I recognized. It looked like a neighborhood of older houses near the northern side of the city, a place students did not go often. It was about a 10-minute walk from where I stood. I went alone, which still feels like the stupidest thing I have ever done. The night air smelled of lake water and car exhaust, the sky glowing faintly from downtown lights. As I moved farther from the crowds, everything got quieter. The streets narrowed, framed by small houses with peeling fences, dim porch lights, and long shadows. Kelowna had this strange stillness in its older neighborhoods, like the air held old stories nobody wanted to repeat. When the GPS said I had arrived, my heart sank. The house looked abandoned, dark from corner to corner, curtains drawn tight. I tried calling again and it went straight to voicemail. The silence made the street feel stretched and hollow. Something in me screamed to turn back, but the location marker sat inside that house. I felt responsible. She needed me. The front door was already slightly open, like someone had left in a hurry. I pushed it gently. It creaked like a warning. The inside was darker than the outside, shadows layered on shadows. No voices, no movement. The place looked empty, like someone had moved out weeks ago. Dusty floor, bare walls, a faint smell of damp wood. I waited at the doorway, listening. Then I heard footsteps inside, fast ones, moving straight toward me. A man's outline surged from the darkness. I did not think. I ran. I sprinted down the yard, across the street, cutting through the neighbor's driveway. I vaulted a low fence and fell onto grass, the cold dew soaking into my jeans. Footsteps thundered behind me. I scrambled up and kept running, finding a different street and turning sharply. Only when I reached the far corner did the chasing sound fade. When I stopped, I could barely breathe. I dialed emergency services and told them my friend might be in danger. I waited on the sidewalk, shaking, watching the shadows between houses as if they might move again. 15 minutes later, a police car arrived. I guided the officer to the house. He knocked, waited, then knocked again, louder. After a long moment, someone opened the door. It was Lacey, crying so hard she could barely stand. I felt relief crash through me like a wave. Later that night, once everything settled at the station and she got calmer, she told me what happened. A man at the bar had talked to her, charming, friendly. He convinced her he would drive her to another bar to meet the others. But he took her to that house instead. Another man was waiting. They forced her inside. They did not hurt her, but they threatened her and kept her in a back room. They made her call me, made her send the location, then took her phone away. They had seen us together earlier and wanted us both. She told me they planned to grab me as soon as I stepped inside. My skin crawled hearing that. I kept picturing the man striding toward me in the dark hallway. After I ran, both men fled. They were caught weeks later. The house belonged to someone who had recently moved out. The men had broken in and used it because it looked empty. That explanation should have brought closure, but it never did. Because the city held other shadows, ones that did not fit into police reports. Strange things have been happening around Kelowna that spring, things I did not share with the officers. Things I barely admitted to myself. For weeks before that night, during my early morning jogs near the condo path along the lake, I noticed a shape on a rooftop. A person always standing in the same place at dawn. Every day, the pale outline held a phone up, pointed directly at me. No matter what time I ran, no matter the weather, that figure watched and recorded. By the time I told myself to confront it, the rooftop was empty and locked behind a gate. A group of teens I knew from elective classes said they found traps on a forest trail near Knox Mountain. At first, they looked like snares for animals, but the teens swore they were too large, too heavy, shaped like something made for people instead. They left quickly and refused to talk about it again. A realtor in our building kept showing houses listed as vacant, but neighbors whispered that the curtains moved on their own, like someone stood inside watching each showing and never wanting to be found. The city felt different in those days, like invisible hands were gently changing the shape of our nights, nudging people into the wrong places at the wrong times. I thought the night with Lacey was the end of my fear, the final note of danger. But it only pushed my senses sharper, made me notice how often I felt eyes on me. Months later, long after summer began, when the lakeside paths were busy and the sky stayed light until 9:30 p.m., I saw something familiar. I had gone for an evening jog and passed the same condo where I used to see the figure recording me. The rooftop was empty again, but as I kept running, a movement caught my eye. Curtains in a nearby vacant house parted for a second. A phone glinted in the gap, pointed at me. I froze. I waited for the curtain to close again. It did, slowly, like someone wanted me to know they were there but not who they were. Every instinct told me to leave, but part of me stayed long enough to be sure I was not imagining things. The small ripples on the curtain's edge showed that someone inside moved away from the window. That house was for sale. It was supposed to be empty. After that, I stopped jogging near the lake. I stopped walking alone at night. I locked every door twice and kept the blinds shut. Even then, I felt like someone knew my routine, the rhythm of my movement, the quiet spaces in my schedule. I never saw the men who kidnapped Lacey again, not even during the trial. But sometimes I wondered if they had worked alone, or if Kelowna simply had pockets of darkness that allowed people like them to blend in and multiply. There was something else too, something I never told Lacey. When she was safe that night and the officer brought her out of the house, I saw something behind her in the hallway. A shadow, taller than the men we saw later in the reports. It stood at the end of the corridor, still and silent. I blinked and it was gone. Stress can twist memory, but the hallway was lit by the officer's flashlight. Shadows do not move against light. They do not form thin, long shapes that disappear like breath. Sometimes I think someone else was in that house, someone who never ran when the police arrived, someone who waited. Now, even years later, when I walk past dim windows or see curtains shift without a breeze, I feel that same weight in the air. As if the city remembers me, as if the eyes watching from rooftops and empty houses were part of something that did not end when those men were caught. Kelowna still looks beautiful in summer, glowing with lake water and mountain silhouettes. But beauty does not erase what hides behind it. And every time I pass a dark house or see a rooftop door cracked open, I wonder if that night was supposed to go differently, if I was meant to step inside, if someone learned my face before I ever saw theirs. Sometimes, late at night, I wake to the faint click of a phone camera. Not loud enough to be real, just soft enough to feel imagined. But the sound always comes from the same place, right outside my window. I always believed the quiet edges of Kamloops held memories better than people did, and for most of my life I tried to forget the one that almost ruined my family. But after talking with my father a few nights ago, everything I buried crawled back up like something that had been waiting just under the soil. My name is Caleb Warren, and back then I was a skinny kid who thought the woods were home. Someone who trusted the sound of moving branches and the cold breath of mountain air more than anything in the city. I grew up in a small rental on the outskirts of Kamloops where my mother worked at a bakery and my dad drove trucks for a living. The kind of job that kept him gone for days but taught me early that he was the kind of man who didn't scare easily. Our golden retriever, Maple, was the happiest thing in our lives, and she came with us on every camping trip like she knew the mountains were our church. My best friend back then was Jonas, a kid who lived 2 houses down who always carried too much energy, and since it was my birthday weekend, I got to pick where we were camping. I chose a lake tucked deep into the hills north of Kamloops, one we visited many times before, a quiet place surrounded by thick trees where the air smelled like pine and cold stone. The hike to the lake was a few miles through heavy forest, but the trail was wide and usually empty, and back in those days, it wasn't strange to let your dog run free. Maple darted ahead of us, tail whipping through the air, paws crunching the forest floor as if the world belonged to her. Jonas and I pushed ahead of my parents, maybe 70 or 80 yards, pretending we were explorers leading the way, laughing too loud, stepping over roots and rocks like we were racing something invisible. Then Maple froze. Her whole body stiffened, ears pinned back, and she let out a low growl. She never growled. Not once in her life had I heard her make a sound like that, deep and warning, like she was trying to hold something back from coming closer. We stopped. My first thought was wildlife, maybe a deer or a bear hiding behind the thick brush. Jonas stepped back, and I did too, keeping my eyes on Maple, whose fur began to rise along her back as she stared into the trees. My parents caught up quickly, and my dad asked what happened, and I told him Maple was growling at something. He didn't hesitate. He walked past us toward her, and near the small hunting pistol he always carried on hikes, something he used only once before when a black bear had come too close for comfort. Maple whimpered when he reached her and nudged her way closer to him, still looking at the trees. My dad scanned the woods, calm but alert, then walked back to us saying it was likely just an animal we startled. He took the lead after that, and little by little Maple calmed down, tail wagging again, though every so often she glanced behind us. When we reached the lake, it was empty, sparkling beneath the late afternoon light with no sound but the wind brushing the water. Jonas and I picked out the best tent spot, and my parents set theirs nearby. After camp was done, everyone scattered. My parents went to fish near the shoreline while Jonas, Maple, and I went around the lake to look for salamanders. We didn't make it far, maybe a third of a mile. Maple stopped again. Another growl. Low, steady, like something inside her had remembered fear. We both looked around. The wind moved the trees, but something else moved too, something heavier. The brush rustled, and a man stepped out. He was tall, taller than my dad, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", thin with long arms and narrow shoulders, wearing pressed black pants and a pale shirt tucked into a belt, polished shoes, too clean, too neat, too wrong for a place like this. He looked like he had walked out of an office or a church instead of a forest. His smile, I still feel it when I try to sleep. It stretched too wide and too still, like the muscles didn't understand how a smile should work. Maple barked, sharp and loud, and the sound bounced across the lake. My parents looked up instantly, calling for us, and Jonas and I started backing up toward them. My dad met us halfway, calm but tense, and told us to go back to camp. He walked toward the man while my mom kept close to us. I could hear my dad ask him if he was lost or camping nearby. The man said he was just walking, then turned around and disappeared into the trees. My dad said he thought the man might be someone inexperienced, someone who didn't know how to dress for a hike, but he didn't like his vibe and he planned to keep watch. Maple didn't take her eyes off the direction the man left. When evening came, we ate, made s'mores, and Jonas and I went to our tent to read. Maple curled up just outside the flap. My parents walked down to the water to relax, only a short distance away. A few minutes passed quietly. Then Maple growled again. Then footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from the woods behind our tent. Jonas and I shut off our flashlight, frozen, listening as the steps reached the tree line. Breathing followed, harsh, uneven, too close. Maple barked, and the steps retreated into the forest. My parents rushed back, saying they heard Maple. I told my dad what happened. He said we'd keep an eye out and maybe move in the morning, but not to panic. For a little while, I believed him. The next day was bright, calm, almost peaceful. We fished, laughed, and nearly forgot what happened until we returned from a short hike to the waterfall above the lake. Our tents were open. Our sleeping bags were dragged out into the dirt. No gear was missing, but nothing looked right. My dad said it wasn't an animal. Animals don't unzip tents. He said we were leaving. We packed fast and hiked out quicker than I thought possible. When we reached the trailhead, one of our car tires was flat. Dad muttered that it wasn't a natural puncture. He changed it fast, but when he tried to start the car, nothing happened. He opened the hood. The spark plug wires were gone, not loose, not broken, removed. Dad slammed the hood and cursed. The trailhead was empty. No hikers, no cars, no noise. He decided to walk toward town to find help while my mom, Jonas, Maple, and I stayed with the car. It grew hot, the hours stretching long. We were tired, hungry, and uneasy. Then a voice drifted out of the trees. The man stepped out again. The same smile, the same clean clothes. Maple whimpered and backed against my legs. The man asked if we needed help. My mom told him we were fine and didn't need anything. He insisted we come to his camp nearby, said he was parked on an old fire road. Mom refused again, firmer. His smile dropped for a moment, then returned sharper. He told her it wasn't safe out here for a woman and two young girls. My mom stood tall and said we weren't interested. He left, slowly, looking back at us twice. Mom was shaken. Jonas and I were scared, and Maple wouldn't stop staring at the trees. About 20 minutes later, he came back. This time, he wasn't alone. Another man followed behind him, younger, scruffy, wearing outdoor gear but with eyes that were cold and flat. They spread out as they approached. Maple growled, deep and steady. One of them let his shirt lift just enough to show the handle of a gun tucked into his waistband. The older one said we needed to go with them now, and they weren't asking. My mom stepped back toward us and reached for her belt, pulling the large Bowie knife my dad always sharpened before trips. She held it low, steady, telling them we weren't going with anyone. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They waited, like they were deciding if hurting us was worth it. Then Maple lunged forward, barking hard, teeth bared, and both men hesitated, stepping back. A truck engine echoed across the dirt. The men vanished into the trees just as a forest ranger's truck pulled into the trailhead. My dad jumped out of the passenger side and ran to us. The ranger went after the men but returned saying they had driven off in a truck with a camper, leaving no plate visible. We left as soon as the car was fixed. Spent the rest of the weekend at a motel near the coast. A few days later, a deputy called my father. They never found the men. He said it was likely an opportunistic crime, that they had watched us from the trees, tested our reactions, and sabotaged the car to isolate us. But that was only part of it. Weeks later, 3 hikers from different days came into town saying they saw a tall man standing still on a ridge, watching them descend. Each described the same figure. A woman in a neighborhood across town reported her car alarm going off every night at the same time, and the security footage only showed a strange shadow approaching but never forming into a person. And at a small roadside motel outside Kamloops, a guest staying in room 6 said someone tested her doorknob quietly at 2:20 a.m. for a full week, but no one was ever caught. Every time I heard one of those stories, the same image came back. a smile that didn't know how to be human, shoes too perfect for dirt, hands that never shook. Sometimes I wonder if he ever stopped walking the forests out there, waiting for someone else to wander in. Sometimes I wonder if he remembers us. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night and hear footsteps outside my window, slow and patient, I wonder if he ever stopped looking. I was not supposed to remember that afternoon, but some memories cling to you like cold hands that never let go. I grew up in Prince George, that small city pressed between long roads and deep forest, where the wind always carries the smell of pine and something older. People there talk about shadows moving between the trees or strange tapping on cabin windows during long winter nights, but nobody ever says these things out loud when the sun is shining. They pretend it is all stories. They pretend everything is fine. Back then, I was 15 and staying at my dad's house on the south side of town. My name is Smith, and at that time, I was just a quiet kid who liked drawing old railway bridges and abandoned mills. I was not brave. I was not strong. And I never thought anything truly dangerous would come for me or my brother in the middle of a bright day. But danger does not always wait for darkness. That day started warm and bright. The kind of northern afternoon where the sun feels too soft to hurt anyone. My dad and stepmom had taken my younger siblings to a soccer game in a nearby town, leaving me and my brother alone in the house. We spent most of that afternoon stretched out in my dad's room at the back of the house, watching some action movie on the old TV he kept near the dresser. The room always smelled like cedar chips and old laundry, and the drawn curtains made it easy to forget how quiet the house was. It should have been an easy day, a simple day. But sometimes simple days split open and show you what lives underneath. When the knock came at the front door, it didn't sound strange at first. My brother and I were latchkey kids because we lived mostly with our single mom on the other side of town. People dropping by was normal over there, the kind of neighborhood where kids bike to each other's houses without warning because not every kid had a phone, so the knock should not have meant anything. But at my dad's place, in that quiet stretch of road near the forest line, nobody ever came by. I did not know a single person in that neighborhood. Neither did my brother. Something about that knock felt wrong the moment it echoed through the hallway. We both froze. My first thought was that maybe one of my dad's friends stopped in. But he rarely had visitors, and nobody knew we were home. Nobody was supposed to be there. We tried ignoring it, hoping whoever it was would leave. But my mind kept circling around the idea that maybe, just maybe, the door was unlocked. That possibility built a pressure in my chest. I could feel it. My brother could too. One of us had to check. I looked at him, he looked at me, and I could tell right away he wasn't going to move. So I forced myself up, legs shaky, palms sweating, and crept down the hallway that ran from the back room to the front entrance. That hall always felt too long, too narrow, like walking down it meant stepping into something you couldn't step out of. The front door had a small window beside it, covered with blinds. The house was built strangely, tucked behind tall hedges and old pine trees, so the front door couldn't be seen from the street. If someone wanted to hide there, they could. If someone wanted to do something awful, nobody would see. I crouched low, gently lifted two blinds with my fingers, and peered out. A man stood there. He was middle-aged, tall and thin, bald on top with short gray hair around the sides. He wasn't huge, but there was something stretched and tired about the way he held himself. His hands were behind his back. I couldn't tell if he held one object or two, but I saw something metal, something small, something that caught the sunlight. My chest tightened. I thought it was a knife. Maybe it was. To this day, I still don't know. He didn't look at the window, didn't show any sign he saw me watching him. But that only made it worse. People who want help glance around. People who want trouble don't. I reached up and twisted the lock as slowly as I could. The door had been unlocked. My hand trembled as the bolt slid into place. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing. I backed away, crawled until I was safely out of view, then ran back down the hall to my dad's room. My brother looked at me with wide eyes, and I told him everything. He grabbed the house phone and called our dad. I don't remember if we had a phone in the room or if he had to cross to another, but soon enough he was talking fast, voice shaking. My dad told us to let his dog inside. He owned a Rhodesian Ridgeback, a big loud dog that acted like a guard even when he was half asleep. In that moment, the dog felt like the only thing standing between us and that stranger at the door. My brother and I bolted to the back door, pulled it open, and the dog bounded in, barking like he already knew something was wrong. The sound made me feel safer, but only by a thread. Instead of hiding in a bedroom far from the stranger, we made a strange choice. We locked ourselves in the bathroom right next to the front door. Maybe we thought it was better to be close enough to hear if the guy was coming in, or maybe we were just scared and ran into the first room we saw. The bathroom was tiny, cold, smelling like bleach. We locked the door, pressed our backs against the tub, and called emergency services. My brother held a kitchen knife, his knuckles white. I clutched the phone, voice cracking as I tried to tell the operator what was happening. And then I heard it. The front door handle twisted. Slow, careful, careful. Testing. The dog exploded in loud barks, claws scraping against the tile as he tried to shove the bathroom door open from our side, desperate to reach whatever was outside. I held my breath. If the man got inside, he would face the dog first. Then us. Two kids with no plan and no strength. My mind raced with every terrible possibility. My arms felt numb. My legs shook with fear so deep it almost felt like cold water filling me up. We whispered to each other, hoping the operator would send someone soon. Every second felt like an hour. My heart pounded so hard, I thought the stranger would hear it. But then everything stopped. No footsteps. No twisting handle. No breathing. Just silence, and the dog whining low at the bottom of the door. When the police finally arrived, they were quick and loud, shouting, knocking, making enough noise that we knew it was safe. My dad and stepmom returned soon after, voices rushing, arms around us. But by then, the stranger was gone. No footprints, no sign he had even been there. People tried to make sense of it. My dad insisted it was the neighbor, maybe coming to complain about the dog barking too much. He said maybe the neighbor had been trimming hedges and had clippers in his hands. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But there were things that didn't fit. The neighbor never came by when the driveway was empty. Trying the door handle didn't sound like a neighborly act, and if he was trimming hedges, why come to complain when nobody else was home? Why hide something behind his back? Everyone tried to forget the event. Pretend it wasn't as terrible as it felt. But Prince George has its own stories, and you never know which ones you've stepped into until it's too late. A month later, logging road workers found fresh footprints leading into a patch of woods north of the river. They followed them for nearly half a mile until the prints simply stopped. No tracks leading back out, no disturbance, just gone. Around that same time, people in the older neighborhoods whispered about a stranger going door to door asking which houses had only one person living inside. The police never confirmed it, but people talked. People always talk. My cousin, who lived in a cabin near Ness Lake, said she kept hearing tapping on her windows during the night. She tried opening one to see if someone needed help, but the tapping would shift to the opposite side of the building. She stopped opening the windows after that. All these stories rolled through my mind like cold wind every time I walked past a quiet street or heard the creak of a door. I kept imagining that same tall man, standing with his hands behind his back, watching silently. I tried to move on. I grew older. I became a wildlife photographer, spending my days walking through forests and old logging areas, trying to capture the kind of beauty most people overlook. The woods around Prince George became familiar to me, like an old friend, but sometimes even friends hide things from you. One autumn, years after that day, I was hiking along an old trail west of town to photograph early snowfall. The air was quiet, the ground soft, and the trees rose like giants around me. The forest felt empty at first, peaceful even, until I noticed something strange near a moss-covered stump. Footprints. Fresh ones. They led into a cluster of trees. Only one set. Deep heel marks like someone was walking with purpose. But after 20 or so steps, The prints vanished. No turnaround. No fading. Just gone, the same way the workers had described years ago. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. I kept moving, trying to shake the unease, but the forest felt wrong that day. The air felt too still. The shadows looked too long. Even the birds seemed to be watching me. I camped for the evening at a small clearing. When the sky darkened, the cold set in, and I could hear the winds brushing the treetops. I tried to sleep in my tent, but just before I drifted off, I heard tapping. Soft, slow, and deliberate against the thin fabric. I froze. The tapping moved, circling the tent like someone dragging fingers across the material. My breath felt trapped in my throat. Then silence. Total silence. Total silence. I waited, counting the seconds, holding my breath, but I did not step outside. I stayed inside that tent until daylight returned, and the frost on the ground glittered like broken glass. There were no footprints, no signs of anything walking around my tent. When I got back to town, I asked my dad one last time about the stranger who showed up that day when I was 15. He stuck to his neighbor theory, but the more he said it, the more I saw fear behind his eyes, like he didn't believe it anymore either. Like he needed that explanation to sleep at night. Now, whenever I return to my hometown, I avoid the road where that house still stands. The trees there look the same, tall and quiet, shielding the place from the street. I know anything could be hiding behind them. I never learned who the man was. I do not know what he held behind his back. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something sharp. Maybe he was just a confused neighbor. Or maybe he was someone who watched certain houses, waiting for the right moment when only one person was inside. Sometimes I dream about him. In the dream, I see myself as the kid peeking through the blinds. And this time, the stranger looks up. He sees me. He smiles. He starts walking toward the window. That is when I always wake up. But sometimes, right as I am drifting off again, I swear I hear tapping. Soft, slow, slow, moving from one side of my room to the other. I should have quit the night shift the moment the road went quiet. My name is Jackson, and 6 years ago I worked nights at a small all-night gas station just outside Nanaimo, British Columbia. It sat a few minutes from town, where the streetlights thinned out and the forest pressed close. I took that job because I needed rent money fast, and because the overnight shift sounded simple. Most nights it was. That was the problem. The easy nights made you drop your guard. The shop was small. 2 short aisles, a wall of coolers that hummed nonstop, and a cheap TV hanging near the ceiling to keep me awake. This was before I had a smartphone, so that little TV mattered more than it should have. I kept the volume low, just enough to keep my brain busy. Overnight, customers were rare. Cars might stop for fuel, but most drivers never came inside. And honestly, I preferred it that way. One person walking into a bright store at a dead hour can feel like a threat, even when they do nothing. That night was wet and cold, the kind of coastal chill that sinks in deep. Mist drifted over the lot under the pump lights. Across the road was dense woods, dark and thick with moss and wet branches. To the side was tall grass and scattered trees. It felt isolated, like the station was the only thing awake. I remember the clock reading 2:12 a.m. because I had just checked it and sighed. That stretch between 2 and 3 always moved slow. I was behind the counter, bored, scanning the empty aisles and watching the windows out of habit. Then I saw a figure outside. A man was walking toward the pumps from the field side, stepping out of tall grass like he had been standing there for a while. That direction made no sense. There were no houses, no sidewalk, no trail. Just ditch water, weeds, and forest. He moved slowly, steady, like he was doing it on purpose. Under the lights, I could see he was bald, maybe late 40s or early 50s, with a small beard patch on his chin. What bothered me most was his sunglasses. It was the middle of the night, and he still wore them. He reached the pumps and just stood there, facing away from the store. He did not touch the pumps, did not look at the prices, did not look for a car. He simply stood, like he was listening. I watched him for minutes, my stomach tightening, because the longer he stayed still, the less human it felt. After maybe 3 minutes, he started walking toward the shop. I thought, all right, he wants cigarettes, he wants coffee, something normal. But when he reached the door, he stopped and did not go inside. He pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and smoked right in front of the entrance like he owned the place. The orange flicker of the lighter reflected on his sunglasses. He kept his face angled slightly away, like he did not want me to read his expression, even though he had already hidden his eyes. When he finished, he crushed the cigarette with his shoe and walked away. Not down the road, not to a vehicle. He crossed the empty street and walked straight into the woods. No path, no opening, no trail, just dense forest swallowing him in 2 steps. I stood there staring, trying to force a normal reason into my head. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was camping. Maybe he was cutting through. None of it felt right. The woods across that road were thick and wet, the kind of place you avoid at night unless you know it well. I checked the clock again and it read 2:21 a.m. I tried to focus back on the TV, but the laughter sounded wrong, too cheerful in a place that suddenly felt hostile. I kept glancing at the tree line. Then I saw movement again. The same man stepped out of the woods, crossed the street, and came straight toward the door. This time, he did not stop. He walked inside. The little bell above the entrance rang, and that tiny sound made the store feel even emptier, like the building itself had been holding its breath. He walked directly to the counter without looking at anything else. He smelled like damp earth and cold smoke. His jacket shoulders were wet, like he had brushed against soaked leaves. I said, "Hey, can I help you?" forcing my voice to stay calm. He leaned in and spoke in a rough, angry tone. "I need $200. For a second, my brain did not understand. It sounded so blunt, it almost felt unreal. I said, "What do you mean? I cannot just give you money." He did not blink. He leaned closer, voice sharper. 200. "Open it, now, now." He nodded toward the register. I could not see his eyes behind the sunglasses, and that made it worse. His hands were empty, but that did not calm me. People hide knives. People hide guns. People have friends outside. And I was alone. Behind the counter, tucked low where customers could not see, I kept a can of pepper spray. My boss put it there and told me it was for emergencies. I had never used it before. The man leaned even closer, too close, and shouted, 200 now. My fear turned into a hard, fast decision. My hand dropped, grabbed the pepper spray, and came up in one motion. I aimed at his face and pressed. The hiss was loud. The spray hit him full on. He stumbled back instantly, hands flying to his eyes. A raw sound came out of him, half scream, half curse. He slammed into the candy rack and knocked snacks to the floor. His sunglasses slipped off, and I saw his eyes, red and watering, but what struck me was his expression. Not panic, not surprise. More like frustration, like I had ruined something he expected to work. I shouted, "Get out! I am calling the police." He backed away, still rubbing his eyes, and stumbled out the door. I grabbed the phone, shaking, and dialed emergency services. While it rang, I watched him through the window. I expected him to run. He did not. He walked in slow circles under the lights, one hand over his face, like he was looking for something on the ground. Then he crouched near the curb and pulled up a thin line from the grass. A fishing line. It glinted in the light, nearly invisible. He tugged it once, like testing tension, then stood and walked toward the road, holding it loosely. My stomach dropped because I knew there was a bridge just down the road, a low concrete span over a dark creek. In daylight, kids sometimes stopped there. At night, it was just a black mouth in the forest. The dispatcher answered. I told her about the man, the demand for money, the pepper spray, and the direction he went. She asked if I was safe. I said yes, but my body did not believe it. I locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and kept the pepper spray in my hand. The air inside still burned with chemicals. The store felt contaminated. Every shadow looked thicker. Time dragged until the clock hit 2:43 a.m., and that is when a pickup truck appeared on the road. At first I felt relief because it was another person, another set of headlights. Then the truck slowed as it reached the station, but it did not turn in. It kept going toward the bridge, slowed even more, and then the headlights shut off. The truck kept moving in darkness. For a moment I could still see it by faint taillights, then those also went out. It became a sliding shadow on an empty road. I thought of stories I had heard in Nanaimo about a pickup tailgating women late at night, turning its lights off when no one else was around. I always assumed those were exaggerations. Sitting there alone, watching a truck disappear with its headlights off, it stopped feeling like a rumor. A few minutes later, the pickup came back. This time, it crept along with its headlights still off, moving slow, like it did not want to be noticed. Then it turned into the station lot at the last second, and the headlights snapped on, blasting the windows with bright white light. I flinched, then forced myself to stand tall behind the counter. The truck did not pull up to the pumps. It stopped near the edge of the lot, close to the tall grass. The driver did not get out. The engine stayed running. It just sat there, as if waiting for something, as if the driver knew I was inside and wanted me to know they were there. My mouth went dry. I stared back, trying to see a face, a plate, anything useful. I could not. The windshield reflected the station lights. The cab was a dark box. Then, slowly, the pickup backed out and drove away. As it left, the headlights stayed on, normal again, like it had never done anything strange. I stood there shaking, listening to the hum of the coolers, feeling like I was trapped in a glass box. Near the end of my shift, I saw something on the floor by the door, sitting on the welcome mat like someone had placed it carefully. A woman's purse. I had not seen it earlier. No one had come inside since the door had been locked. I stared at it for a long time. Finally, I used paper towels to pick it up like it could be dirty in a different way. It was heavier than it should have been. I set it on the counter and opened it. Nothing looked stolen. No wallet missing, no cards gone, no messy digging. It was too neat. Then I found it, taped inside a side pocket. A small black tracker. My stomach rolled. Whoever this belonged to had not simply lost it. Someone had taken it, planted a tracker, and put it back into circulation, like bait. And somehow it ended up at my door. I called the police again. When officers arrived, they searched the lot, checked the woods, scanned the road, and found nothing. No man, no clear footprints, no trail, nothing that explained where he came from or where he went. One officer held the tracker in a bag and asked where I got the purse. When I told him, his face tightened. Before they left, I mentioned the fishing line and the bridge. They exchanged a look. One officer admitted they had heard complaints about weird stuff under that bridge, fishing lines hanging down and children's shoes tied to them. Some shoes were new. Some were so old they cracked when touched. He said it like he wanted it to sound casual, but it did not. When my shift ended, dawn was finally pushing gray into the sky. Birds started calling in the trees. The world looked normal again, but my chest still felt tight. I drove home watching my mirrors. Every pickup made my heart jump. Every dark patch of trees looked like it could hide a person wearing sunglasses. I did not go back the next night. I quit without even picking up my final pay because no money was worth standing alone in a glass box while the woods watched. Weeks later in daylight, I drove past the bridge, trying to prove to myself it had all been a one-time thing. I parked and walked closer. Under the concrete span, thin fishing lines hung in loose curves, almost invisible until the light hit them. Tied to them were children's shoes, dozens of pairs, swaying gently. Some were bright and clean, others were yellowed and brittle, like they had been there for decades. I felt sick. I backed away, and as I did, one of the lines tightened slightly, like someone had pulled it from the shadows beneath the bridge. I did not wait to see anything else. I left. Even now, when the rain hits my window late at night, I think about that purse with the tracker and what it really meant. I think about how the gas station was only 5 minutes from my home, how easy it would have been for someone to follow me, to learn my routine. And I think about the man stepping into the forest like it was not forest at all, like it was a doorway he used often. The scariest part is not that I never saw him again. The scariest part is that I do not know if I was the target or if I was just a test, a trial run, a mistake someone corrected later. Because every few months, someone in Nanaimo still talks about a pickup tailgating them on a dark road, then turning off its headlights when the last other car disappears. And every time I hear that, I remember 2:43 a.m., the lights going out, the truck moving like a shadow, and the woods across the road looking like it was waiting.